Okay, so we're going to wrap up today's lecture with just a little bit of basic GPS terminology, a little bit of its review. So you may see in literature, hear people talk about pseudo-range navigation. And what that means is we're measuring the range or the distance to the satellites using the time delay. So that's basically what we're talking about. So rather than directly measuring the distance, we're measuring the distance via the travel time. So the pseudo range is this distance measurement that's based on the time delay in the transmitted code. Okay, so that's where pseudo range comes from. Standard Positioning Service, SPS, this is a review of what we talked about earlier. Course acquisition or CA code, that's the code that is modulated onto the carrier wave. This is often referred to as code phase GPS, and this is what we're doing. So our Garmins and the mapping grade Trimbles are code phase GPS units. They don't actually use the carrier wave to compute their position. They're only using the code that's modulated on the carrier wave. So if you hear people talk about code phase GPS, that means Garmin's mapping grade units that are just using that L1 carrier wave and the CA code, which is the civilian code modulated on it. Precise Positioning Service is the military service that's using the P code, which is encrypted with the Y code, which is called anti-spoofing. We don't use this. This is the military service. It's a lot more accurate and more robust. So if you've got a survey grade GPS unit, a really high quality GPS unit, it also can actually help pinpoint its location by using the carrier wave. And we didn't get into this for our purposes, we don't need to, but I just want you to understand that if someone talks about carrier GPS or carrier phase GPS, and you'll see this in Pathfinder Office when you go to do your differential correction, our GPS units are not using the carrier wave, but some do, and those are called carrier phase units. And then there are also some units that are dual frequency, which are using the L1 and the L2 frequency waves to help increase the accuracy. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the atmosphere, but I just wanted to be clear about some of the terminology. If you hear about a carrier phase unit, that's not what we're doing. We're using code phase units. And then kind of generally we can classify these different units into big categories. So our recreational grade are our Garmins, Magellans, TomToms. Mapping grade are our handheld Trimble units, so they're a little higher accuracy, and this is what we have. That's why I've put a box around it. Okay, so the Trimble units you'll use this semester are mapping grade GPS receivers. Survey grade instruments are usually carrier phase, dual frequency GPS receivers, and often your antenna is separate, so you might see surveyors out and they've got an antenna on a pole, so the antenna is separate. In the newer ones, the receiver is actually it's in where the antenna is, and then you have a controller that you hold that you communicate with the receiver with. So we're using mapping grade code phase GPS units. And just a little overview with some of that new modernization of GPS. If you want more information about that, there's a link there. So that wraps up our basic concepts section of our Intro to GPS.